Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live event with Congressman Adam Smith. During this call, we'll be taking questions from constituents like you. To ask a question, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad. Also, during today's event, you can get signed up for our newsletter by pressing star 6 at any time. So remember, press star 3 to ask a question and star 6 to subscribe to our newsletter. And with that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Smith. Congressman, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks everybody for joining. We've done several of these here in the last week or so, and I want to keep doing as many telephone town halls. I'm going to try to do some in-person town halls as well, coming up starting at the end of this month. I think there's a lot going on, and it's important to stay in communication. There are other ways, of course, to contact my office, and I know many of you have done that. We receive a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of contacts, and that's great. Happy to take your comments and hopefully answer whatever questions that you have. So just a few things I want to go over. I mean, first of all, I want to let you all know sort of how I'm thinking about the challenges right now in dealing with the Trump administration. And it is difficult because, look, I mean, my fundamental belief and the reason I got into politics is that basically what politics is supposed to be about is you bring large, diverse groups of people together and you try to make sure everybody's voice is heard and you try to solve problems. And I've always had a very open philosophy on that. I will work with absolutely anybody to try to improve things for the community I represent and our country. And I try to be open and flexible about that, no matter where you're at on the political spectrum. In fact, even during the first Trump administration, I worked a great deal with Trump administration on a number of different issues, and I'm not going to stop doing that. But I certainly think the Trump administration has presented some unique challenges. So if you hear me being a little bit more forceful in my complaints, criticisms, and concerns about the Trump administration, it's not because I've changed my fundamental philosophy about how to do my job and the importance of representation. It's just that I see a profound threat in some of those actions, and I want to try to build a coalition and rally some folks to move us in a different direction. And there's really, three broad things that I'm focused on in that concern. One is I do think that our basic concepts around our representative democracy have been threatened by the Trump administration during the first, what are we up to now? 40 days-ish of his time in office in ways that we haven't seen before. I mean, there's a bunch of different examples, but firing all 18 inspector generals was one big red flag. And ironically, inspector generals are there to find waste, fraud, and inefficiencies in the federal government. So firing all of them took away an important watchdog function. And of course, we had the firings at the Department of Defense, where the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff for the first time ever was removed by a president. And General C.Q. Brown is a very capable, very smart person, and nobody questions that. So it seemed like there was a move away from the normal system of checks and balances and towards an effort to consolidate power. And also, I'm firmly of the opinion that all of these programs that the president and Elon Musk have been shutting down, they are doing that in violation of the law. These are programs that were passed into law by Congress that the president cannot unilaterally shut down. And we've had several court decisions that have agreed with that. And you've got the situation with USAID, where literally almost our entire foreign aid operation was shut down in just the matter of a couple of weeks, including basically breaking thousands, actually 10,000 different contracts that we had, sort of turning the United States of America into an unreliable deadbeat in terms of being a partner. So the breadth of this is unprecedented, and I do think it undermines the basic concepts of representative democracy in a way that I have not witnessed before. And I will speak out publicly against that. Second, I am concerned about the economic implications of some of the things that have been done. The mass firings that have happened have really undermined the ability of our federal government to provide necessary services and also placed us at risk. The firings at the National Nuclear Security Administration There's 1,800 people who are responsible for protecting our nuclear weapons. They fired 16% of them before quickly realizing that that wasn't such a good idea, and now they're desperately trying to bring them back. Meanwhile, what's being done on inflation? Well, we fired a whole bunch of people over at the FDA whose job it is to try to contain the bird flu outbreak that we've had. That's certainly not going to help anything. And then we've got the budget approach, which has some $4 trillion in tax cuts, which will drive up the deficit and the debt while cutting roughly $1 trillion out of Medicaid, which is really crucial for the working poor. So I have profound concerns about the economy. And one last one on that front, and that is the tariff issue. I actually met with the Home Builders Association, the master builders, I think they call themselves, a couple days ago, and discussed the tariffs that will go in effect against Mexico. Well, they said that 70% of our gypsum comes from Mexico, which prompted me to ask, what's gypsum? It's drywall. Drywall, I know what drywall is. Drywall is what goes into just about anything that you build. The price of housing is going to go up significantly if we have that much of an increase in the price of the drywall coming in, not to mention the cost of appliances from other countries. I think the tariffs could significantly harm the economy. And we're already seeing consumer confidence come down. Inflation has actually gone up since the start of the administration. So I'd like to stop all of the mass firings and randomly shutting down programs and get us back focused on what can we do to get inflation under control and make sure that our economy continues to grow. The third area of concern is in national security. And I posted a social media video this morning that explains some of this. And I know everyone's very focused on the confrontation in the White House between President Zelensky and President Trump and Vice President Vance. I don't agree with the way Trump and Vance handled that conversation. But put that aside for the moment. I believe that our national security is being jeopardized by a lot of the decisions and actions that the Trump administration is taking. Don't get me wrong, I'm also a very strong supporter of protecting Ukraine against Russia for a wide variety of different reasons. But even if you're not there on that, we are alienating just about every single friend and ally that we've ever had. You know, Canada, Europe, Australia, with threatening tariffs all over the place, and telling the rest of the world that we don't care about them at all. From now on, we're looking after ourselves first, second, and last. Not having friends in the complicated world we live in jeopardizes our national security. As the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee, I can tell you that all of those partners and allies work in cooperation with us on a wide variety of issues. Canada, I met with the Northern Command commander. That's the Department of Defense person who looks after North American defenses. We are in direct partnership with Canada to be able to monitor airspace and protect us. We also buy a lot of our materials for our national security needs from Canada. If we blow all of that up, and we don't have the relationship with Canada, and Canada, and a whole bunch of other countries are going to start to look elsewhere for their security concerns. On the USAID and the foreign aid program, we shut down programs after promising that we were going to deliver them to almost 100 different countries. How much are those countries going to want to work with us on anything going forward? They're going to turn to China and Russia and other partners in the world, and that undermines our national security. I would also submit that smashing our federal government undermines our security as well. I already mentioned the National Nuclear Security Administration, but if our food safety is jeopardized, if our cybersecurity is jeopardized, the DOJ has a whole group of unvetted people who have not received security clearances that now have access to some of the most sensitive information available, to our healthcare records, to our tax records, to our social security number, and to the most sensitive national security programs that we have. In fact, Elon Musk was on the Joe Rogan show yesterday bragging about that and telling Joe Rogan on a national, on a wide open broadcast programs that we didn't have. That places us at risk if that information can be accessed by our adversaries And then we have the report today that the Department of Defense, at Secretary Hegseth's orders, has stood down on our cyber protections against Russia. I don't know why that would happen. It's widely reported. We have not yet been able to confirm it. But all of this jeopardizes the national security of our country. So those are all significant concerns. Now, then what do we do about it? How do we respond to this? I've also been very open and very vocal that it's not enough to just criticize Trump and go ringing alarm bells all day long. There has to be a reasonable alternative. And I have my concerns about some of the things that the Democratic Party has done, and some of our failings in terms of our ability to govern effectively in different places. Look, the immigration policy that we had led to a border that was not sufficiently secure. No doubt about it. I think we need to look at that and figure out how to. We did make some changes during the end of the Biden administration, but I think we can certainly learn from that. And then, as many of you have heard, here locally, I have concerns about crime, homelessness, drug abuse, the inability to build affordable housing. We need to show that we can govern effectively. And I know I've been negative on some of the things that we haven't done well. I'm deeply concerned about our alternatives to incarceration program. The Regional Homelessness Authority has been very ineffective and inefficient at dealing with homelessness, and we ought to improve that. But there are positives out there. I've worked very closely with Mayor Bruce Harrell and the Seattle CARE unit, which is headed up by a woman named Amy Barden. And this is the group that is going to offer alternative response units so that you don't always have to send out the police and the fire department and can better deal with mental health crises. They're doing a good job setting it up the right way. We help them with some federal funds so that we'll be able to get out there and help people in crisis in the community and free up law enforcement to deal with the issues that they are better trained to deal with. And that's something that Mayor Bruce Harrell was a great leader on and has done a good job of putting that program in place. I'm also very fond of a thing called Recovery High School, a program that the Seattle School District put in place. It's an alternative school operating out of the old Queen Anne High School that deals with students, high school students and middle school students who are struggling with addiction. They get them into that school, they get them cleaned up, and then crucially, they become ambassadors to go out to schools to help young people not do drugs in the first place. And then if they are struggling with addiction, to help them. That's a good program that deserves our support. There's a group of folks down in Tukwila called Street Level. They have a bunch of vans with equipment that goes around and identifies people who are living on the streets, builds a relationship with them, gets them off the streets and into housing. They have a 95% success record at keeping people off the street 3 years after they first picked them up. I want to encourage and support those programs that are working. And one final one that's not from around here, but the city of Austin has actually built enough housing that their rent costs have gone down from their peak by almost 25% now. They put together a plan that said we need to reduce regulations, make permitting easier, a whole series of things they did that enabled them to build more housing in a way that reduced the crisis. There's no reason we can't do that here. So we need to offer better alternatives, show people that there is an alternative to Trump's particular approach to governing that will help people and admit the mistakes that were made. The last point is something two more things. One, and I made this already, I'm going to be very vocal. I don't actually agree with James Carville's assessment that Democrats should simply lay down and play dead and let Republicans run things into the ground. I think we need to be vocal and public and talking a lot about what we're concerned about, but then crucially, as I just did, what we're going to do, how we're going to address the massive income inequality in this country and begin to create more broad-based opportunity. Bunch of things we can do on that front too, by the way. Increases in the minimum wage, increases in overtime pay. We need to get rid of stock buybacks so that companies have more of an incentive to invest in their workers instead of just their shareholders. Whole laundry list of issues we can do, but we got to be doing it constantly. I subscribe to Ezra Klein's theory about how attention is the most important commodity in modern politics and public policy. Everyone's in a competition for people's attention because they've got this thing right there where they can look at things all day long. So if we're going to compete with that, we got to be out there aggressively every day, delivering a message and delivering solutions for the problems that people face. Lastly, quick update on the budget challenges that we're about to walk into. And it's confusing because people tend to conflate three different things. One, we have the budget resolution that the Republicans passed in the House last week. That resolution is a 10-year blueprint going forward and the beginning of the blueprint for FY26, which starts on October 1 of this year. I don't like that, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. It's got about $4.5 trillion worth of tax cuts. As it's currently constructed, it would have almost $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, and it would drive the deficit through the ceiling. We passed it in the House. The Senate passed theirs. They're now going to attempt to reconcile those and pass a budget resolution that will serve as a blueprint for next year's appropriations process and for 10 years of budgeting. So we've got that fight. And then we've got FY25, which we have not yet resolved. FY25 started last October 1st. So we're now almost 6 months, well, a little over 5 months into it. And the continuing resolution expires on March 14th, so 12 days from now. And then if we don't do something at that point, the discretionary portion of the budget, which is roughly 30% of the budget, would in theory not be funded anymore. I say in theory because there are some legal differences of opinion about what exactly happens at that point. But the controversy you'll be hearing about next week is, what do we do when we hit March 14th? The Republicans just walked away from discussions about actually doing the appropriations bills to pass them. And now we're down to a discussion of, do we do a short-term CR? Many Republicans are advocating a continuing resolution for the whole rest of the fiscal year, all the way up to October 1. I am adamantly opposed to that. That takes Congress completely out of the process of funding our government and abdicates our responsibilities to our constituents. We need to pass appropriations bills. Lastly, you have the debt ceiling. We are once again flirting with the edges of our debt ceiling, and it needs to be raised to allow us to continue to borrow money. But the Republicans have tied the debt ceiling into their budget resolution with all those tax cuts and all those Medicaid cuts. I want to be clear. I support raising the debt ceiling. I do not support raising that debt ceiling just to allow the debt to go ever higher because of massive tax cuts, while at the same time you're cutting programs for working people and the poor in this country. So that's where all of that is at. I look forward to your questions, and let's get started with that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. With pleasure, we'll get to the first caller question. But a quick reminder for everybody that's joined us, if you have a question you would like to ask live on this call, please press *3 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. First up, our question comes from James in Renton. James, you're live with Congressman Smith. What's on your mind? Hello, James.
There we go.
James.
I had you
yes,
on mute.
sir.
I apologize.
We got you. Yes.
Good. My wife and I have been watching several of the news programs on YouTube, like
Rachel Maddow.
Yeah, Rachel Maddow and Lawrence, The Last Word, and I'm totally unimpressed by our current president. And my question is, when is the Democrats going to start the impeachment process of our failing president?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're not in a position to start an impeachment process. The Republicans, the impeachment process starts in the House, and the majority party, you have to have a majority of the votes in order to bring that up. The Republicans have 220 members, 215. So now an individual member, Democrat, could file impeachment motions. I will tell you my honest opinion, and I'm very focused on what is going to work tactically and strategically. I'm deeply concerned about what President Trump is doing, as I outlined in my opening remarks, and the different ways to put it back. I don't think a Democrat filing an impeachment motion at this point advances our argument. I think it is a distraction from going after the president's policies and how they are impacting people in the real world. And that is where I think our message should be. So, I'd have to analyze all the different things that have happened in terms of what would constitute an impeachable offense. But as I said, I think the best way to block what Trump is doing is to build support in the country and begin to put more pressure on Republican lawmakers. Now, we've seen some of the town hall meetings that Republican lawmakers have been having where people are concerned about the mass firings, they're concerned about the Medicaid cuts, and they're beginning to
Yes.
push back in a way that is going to require Republicans to respond. I don't know that an impeachment strategy at this point is going to help us in that effort.
Well, hopefully it'll happen later on, because I am certainly not impressed with the first 60 days. It's absolutely mind-boggling
Yeah,
how he
nor am
treated.
I.
Yeah, mind-boggling how he treated President Zelensky and
Embarrassing, yes.
the other federal workers. So, tell you the truth, I'm getting pretty scared.
Yeah. Well, we will fight back against that. I've got to take another question here, but I think there's reason to be concerned, but the thing to do now is to organize and present better options, as I said, and I'm going to keep fighting to do that. Thank you for your question.
So next up, we've got an online question from Tanya, who asks, how can transportation safety be prioritized in this environment of increased focus on efficiency and cost effectiveness? And she suggests we see lessons learned from Challenger.
Yeah, we need to protect the federal workforce. And I think this is one of the biggest things that Trump and Musk are just getting 100% wrong. If you start with the premise that you want a more efficient and more effective federal government, I'm completely with you. I think we need to look for every possible way to do that. But if the premise you start with is that the federal workforce is the problem, you're simply wrong. First of all, understand the numbers here. The federal workforce has not grown in 40 years. And I'm talking real numbers here. I'm not talking adjusted for inflation or adjusted for population growth. The federal workforce is flat. So we have not been hiring tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of federal employees that are sitting in a corner somewhere not doing anything. What we have is a really highly skilled group of people who know what they're doing in a variety of different areas, including air traffic safety. What we don't have enough workers in FAA. And then if you want to go after efficiency and effectiveness, what you really need to look at, to my mind, are rules, regulations, requirements, and bureaucratic impediments to federal workers doing their jobs, which are imposed by a process-oriented approach instead of a problem-solving oriented approach. I know a lot of people who work at DoD are deeply frustrated by their inability to make decisions and change things that need to be changed because of the process that they are strangled with by the regulations that the system has passed. That's how you clean it up. Targeting a talented federal workforce that is protecting us doesn't help. And I'll tell you something else, terrorizing that federal workforce, and I know in a lot of instances when they've fired people, they've come back 2 or 3 days later and said, well, gosh, I guess we were wrong. We really do need you. But how does that make you feel as an employee? How much, first of all, are you going to stick around knowing that some, billionaire with no connection to the government whatsoever is going to be able to fire you on a whim if he feels like it? It undermines confidence. It undermines the ability to build a culture of shared responsibility and a shared sense of purpose in what they're doing. So, I think it's really dangerous what's happening right now. It's undermining the quality of our workforce by firing people and by terrorizing them. So, can we get better? We can always get better. But I do not agree with the assessment that says that the federal workforce is some massively inefficient group of people who aren't doing anything to help us. I see every day they're doing things to help us. So I think we need to support them and free them up to do their jobs better instead of randomly firing them.
So I encourage everybody on the line with us today to take a moment and press *6 on their telephone keypad to get subscribed to the Congressman's e-newsletter. Again, get yourself signed up right here, right now by pressing *6. Back to the phones. Our next question comes from Richard from Federal Way. Richard, you are live with Congressman Smith. What's on your mind, sir?
Hi there. Sorry about the pause. Representative, I saw the other day that U.S. Cyber Command had suspended operations against Russia based on a call from Defense Secretary Hegseth. You sit on the Armed Services Committee. I want to know how that is going to impact the country's safety, that of our soldiers, and basically what the fallout is, and if there is any recourse from the people's voice. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I've been working that problem for the last 36 hours since the story was first brought to my attention. In fact, right before I started this call, I was texting back and forth with Mike Rogers, who is the Republican chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. And he has agreed to, in a bipartisan way, reach out to DOD and say, what is going on, first of all, and second of all, we do not support unilateral disarmament against Russia in this issue on this issue. So, and I also today have spoken to or left messages for a variety of different Democrats in national security positions, Mark Kelly, Mark Warner, and spoke with Chris Coons today and Jim Hines, who's our ranking member on the Intel committee here, to sound the alarm. What we can do is we can put pressure on the Trump administration, bring attention to this, and urge them to reverse course. They have occasionally, as I've mentioned, reversed course on some of the decisions that they have made. Not as much as they should have, to my mind, but public pressure can make a difference. Look, if we want to negotiate some sort of understanding with Russia so that we take the temperature down, maybe we can have arms reduction negotiations. I'm all in favor of that. I don't want to have a conflict with Russia, but unilateral disarmament and unilateral weakness is not the way to get to that peaceful outcome. If Russia were to stop its offensive cyber operations against the U.S., well, then we can have a conversation. But I can tell you they are very, very aggressively targeting our infrastructure. And meanwhile, you've got Elon Musk running around throwing doors open randomly and wildly in ways that people like Russia specifically could take advantage of to really jeopardize the security of this country. And they've already been doing this. We are in a cyber conflict with Russia, not because we started it, not because we chose it, because Russia is engaging in it. And we need to meet that threat. So I'm deeply concerned by the reports of what Secretary Hegseth apparently ordered the Department of Defense to do. And we're pushing back along all of those lines that I just outlined.
All right, moving on. We've got Leah, also in Federal Way, joining us now with a question. Leah, welcome to the call. Go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you. My question is, how are we supposed to fight back to save our democracy when it's clear that the Department of Justice is showing loyalty to Trump, Musk, and the whole administration? Who are we supposed to lean on as American people? Who's going to be fighting for us other than, you and others in Congress and the Senate? And I know it's not supposed to work that way, but here we are. And it feels like they are restraining us at every option that we have. Musk has run amok completely. And how are they supposed to rein him in and get him out of our systems, out of our government?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation, but one of my general philosophies, and I have confronted many significant problems and challenges in my life, and what I've learned is the first thing is don't talk about what you can't do, talk about what you can do. I understand the challenges that they present, but what we can do is we can organize nationally. I think it is very important for leaders like me and others in Congress to be a voice, but we are but part of a larger national process. Organizations can be pulled together, and you've seen some of it. There are groups of people on the local level that are showing up at Republican town halls and expressing their concerns in a way that is beginning to penetrate the consciousness of Republican lawmakers. Because that's the first step here, as I said in the opening thing. To win this type of fight, you got to have a large enough coalition to put pressure. We got to have the Democrats making smart decisions, messaging correctly, but we also have to persuade Republicans that it isn't in their best interest to simply roll over for Trump either. And we've started that process. We need to keep at it. As I also said, unfortunately, this is day in and day out. I'm not taking a day off. Okay, not a single solitary day off. I may go to the gym for an hour here and there, but today I did a couple videos. Yesterday I did a couple of interviews with TV and radio. I'm working with my staff constantly. We need to organize, message on a constant basis. Senator Chris Murphy, actually, I thought summed it up pretty well on CNN this morning when he said, if Trump and Musk are flooding the zone, we need to flood it right back at them by going after the parts of it that they are doing that the public does not like and organize. And the ultimate goal there is to get enough of the public to put enough pressure on members of the House and the Senate so that Republicans begin to think that it's not Trump that they have to fear, it's their constituents that they have to be respond to. And we're moving. It's not going to happen overnight. There's no one tweet, no one interview, no one clever soundbite that's going to automatically turn this around. But progress is coming. Consumer confidence in the economy is way down. Trump's approval numbers are down because what they're doing is not popular. The final piece on the legal side of this, we have to go to the courts. And there are a bunch of lawsuits that have already happened. We've gotten a bunch of positive rulings from federal court judges and from appellate court judges. Our state attorney generals are a big part of this. I've spoken with Nick Brown a couple times throughout this process. Nick is being a real leader on blocking some of these efforts and participating in lawsuits with other states when they're shutting off programs that are harming our constituents illegally because those programs have been approved. File those lawsuits, get those orders. Now, the caveat in all of that is what's the Supreme Court going to do? I don't have an enormous amount of faith in them, but we have to make the public pressure so that Justice Roberts, who likes to claim that he cares for the integrity of the court and doesn't want it to be just a bunch of Trumpian partisan hacks, we have to hold him to that by showing him that the public is not with what Trump is doing. So it's all a collective effort to build that message. Well, meanwhile, the fact that they're running the Justice Department based on personal loyalty to Trump is deeply concerning. But we have to draw attention to that so we can build the public support to begin to stop it. It's a tough fight, not going to deny that. But we do have people who are rallying around the concerns that you have outlined, you and others have outlined, I should say.
I do have another question.
Sure.
Not really a
Quickly.
question.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a hypothetical. My fear is that if Trump gets backed in a corner, which we've seen him come out and how he reacts to things, what can be done if he implements martial law?
Yeah, no, I think, there is that concern. Again, the main thing that can be done there is to make sure that he doesn't have support in that. I mean, if the Republican Senate, Republican House, and all the Democrats there in the country are pushing back against it, and he thinks that's a risk that was going to get the country turned against him, I think that makes it less likely that he's going to do that. But I share that concern. As I mentioned, when this issue came out about Pete Hegseth shutting down our cyber defenses against Russia, I reached out to the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, a Republican. He's concerned about it. The more people we can grow to get concerns, and believe me, for those of you who are listening right now saying, oh my God, the Republicans, they're not standing up to Trump at all. What the hell are you talking about? I understand that. I'm deeply alarmed and annoyed by the degree to which Republican elected officials have simply rolled over for every ridiculous thing Trump has to say and has done, but we got to keep working on them. So your concerns are valid. I don't have a magic solution. I mean, I said this, 7 years ago or whenever the hell it was when Trump was president the first time, and people kept saying, how come you haven't stopped him doing this and you haven't stopped him doing that? We got to be real careful who we elect president because that person has an enormous amount of power. And we got to deal with that. And as I just outlined, it's not hopeless. There's plenty of things we can do, but it's going to be a tough, tenacious fight.
Moving to our next question, sir, we've got Katie joining us from Seattle. And I press this. Can I get a little bit of help here, Suzanne? I'm bringing Katie up, please.
Hello.
So in a quick,
Hey,
Katie, are
how
you
are
with
you?
us?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Go
I
ahead.
got you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. Hi, I am a constituent from Rainier Beach. Thanks for having me on. I am deeply concerned that we have a neo-Nazi in Musk in the office and we have a white supremacist in Trump in the office. And I'm so concerned about their expansion of Guantanamo Bay and their interest in taking especially men of color, immigrants, and shipping them over there where we will not have eyes to see what they are doing. And so much of what Trump is doing really parallels what Hitler was doing. And I'm so concerned that the U.S. is going to end up with a death camp on our hands. So just wondering how the Democrats have been talking about that.
Yeah, no, I think I laid it. I don't know if you're here on for the whole call, but I laid out how to approach that up front. And different aspects of that, maybe I don't agree with all of it. I fundamentally agree that Trump is engaged in an autocratic takeover of our country. He is governing in a way that is concentrating power in the hands of a single individual to a far greater extent than I've ever seen before. And also, he is demonizing certain individuals. Immigrants and the trans community are the two that he has decided to, demonize to try to build support. And I share your concern that he can target them in many of the ways that, I don't know, Hitler's not the only autocrat we have out there to look at. There are a lot of autocratic governments that have began to target people for their political beliefs in an effort to consolidate power outside of democratic norms. You can see what Putin has done. There was a story about, as you know, as now Trump is limiting the reporters who can have access to the White House press pool and banning the AP because they won't call it the Gulf of America. And someone drew a parallel to early on in Putin's reign in Russia, when there was a journalist who was regularly asking questions and all that. And then she was barred from, asking any of those questions and was eventually thrown in jail and died. And not only did that silence that voice, but it also let everybody else know they better not test it. So yes, there are clear autocratic, steps that Trump is taking. And I think, first of all, I believe we need to call that out. Now, a lot of people say, outside of solid Democratic areas, and even if there are, Republicans or independents listening on this call, they're like, oh, here the Democrats go again. Just exaggerating all the threats, doing everything, being partisan. I hear that, but I think the facts are on our side this time, based on a lot of the things that are being done. And thank you for bringing up Guantanamo. They are now housing people that they want to deport at Guantanamo Bay, and there's no reason for that. There are plenty of ways to deal with that, short of going to that prison in Cuba. But it is, again, I think, part of trying to terrorize the population into submission. I think we need to bring attention to that. So I don't think we should shy away from pointing out the autocratic tendencies and the fundamental threat that is being given to the way our republic is supposed to function. Now, I think we also need to build broader support, which is why I talk about the economic issues. If people don't believe us on the autocratic threat, then look at how inflation continues to go up. We're seeing a massive rise in jobless claims. Consumer confidence is down, and there is concern that costs will go up ever higher as the tariffs are put in place. So there are plenty of reasons to be concerned about what Trump is doing, and we need to build a coalition of support to counter that in all the ways that I've said already. So I won't repeat that. But I share your concerns, and I'm working every day to try to counter what is going on.
Thank you.
So it's very important to stay informed, and you can do that by subscribing to the Congressman's informative newsletter by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad right now. Again, get subscribed to the Congressman's e-newsletter by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad. Next, we're heading out to Newcastle. We've got Tiffany joining us now. Tiffany, welcome to the call. Go ahead with your question.
Hey. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Hello. How are you? Yes, I got you.
Thank you. I had a two-part question. The first one relates to how congressional Democrats are
organizing with the attorney generals that have made some progress in challenging many of the administration's actions in court to use a cohesive approach. And in a similar fashion, the second part is, has there been any work on the part of the congressional Democrats to look ahead into the future to figure out what would look like to start planning how to undo some of the damage, whether it is rebuilding secure classified systems, which is its own hassle, or dealing with national parklands or the like, not because, partly out of optimism, partly to get a better handle on what damage has been done?
Yeah, no, I think that's two excellent questions. And the second part is, I think also part of the reason we should do what you suggested on the second part of your question is because, like I said, we have to present an alternative to the American people. I mean, part of the reason that Trump was successful was because people decided that they just didn't trust the Democratic alternative. So coming up with ideas for, here's how we're going to go back to protecting our parks. Here's how we're going to improve safety, air safety through the FAA. Here's how we're going to make government more efficient and more effective legitimately, not just use that as an excuse to crush the federal government so that Musk and his billionaire buddies can do whatever they want to do, but actually make our government more efficient and more effective. Yes, those conversations are going on, and there's a ton of ideas being generated on our side on how to address, the economic challenges that we face. I mentioned some of those ideas earlier. To your first point, we are working very closely with the attorney generals. As I said, I'm very close with Nick Brown, our attorney general. My staff has spoken with him, spoken with his team. I speak with him frequently as we coordinate, what's going on. And then Jamie Raskin, a member of Congress, who is the lead Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, really smart, articulate guy. He is leading our effort to track all of those lawsuits. Because the next step in the lawsuits, the ones that the Trump administration is thus far not fully implementing, is to go back to the courts and seek sanctions. If you get a court order and you don't obey it, the next step is you are fined and potentially imprisoned. And we need to follow that up. So Jamie's leading that. There are some other people who are involved in it. But he's a really, really talented leader. And yes, we are working very closely with all of our attorney generals. We're blessed here in the state of Washington to have Nick Brown, who I think is doing an outstanding job. So both of those things are good questions, and that's what I'm trying to do, and what congressional Democrats are trying to do to make sure we maximize that effort.
Is there a manner in which the rest of us can be involved to help implement, organize, polish things that need to be written, to do actual tasks beyond just brainstorming ideas and all the rest of that? Is there a way that people can get involved to assist that process?
I think you need to, join a variety of different organizations and also message. I mean, one of the things that the Republicans, there was an article in the Seattle Times this morning talking about this. The Republicans has got better, and Trump and the MAGA movement in particular got better at getting information to people in non-traditional spaces. Increasingly, people in our country are forming their political opinions and their policy ideas in new and different areas, on group chats, amongst video gamers, on listening to podcasts. Heck, even this morning, I don't look at Nextdoor, but my wife does. And there was something on there, someone pontificating about, it was a complicated issue, but it was like, why does the U.S. care about Ukraine? And it was getting into that whole thing. But in that area and in that space, that's where people are forming opinions. So if you have these opinions, get into whatever social circles you're in and express the other opinion to counter what Trump is doing. And my wife's general take was, Nextdoor, this shouldn't happen on Nextdoor. All right. Nextdoor should be the place where you go to say, hey, I've got a bunch of furniture I'm trying to get rid of. Anybody want it? All right. And I agree with that, but that's not what it is now. And we have to play the game that is in front of us. In all of these spaces, we need to express the opinions that spread the message, and every single person can do that. There are also a variety of different organizations that have formed, and you can form it around the broader political issue or around a specific issue. There's a group called Results that advocates for foreign aid. making those arguments effectively and showing how the impact of what the Trump administration is doing is going to hurt not just globally but us here locally. If polio and smallpox and all these diseases start spreading again, that hurts us as well as hurting the people who we were supposed to be helping. Results is a great organization to get involved in and supplement their message and add to it. So any space you can get into where people are hearing opinions of their neighbors, get in and start spreading the opinions to try to begin to move public opinion against all of these extreme steps that the Trump administration is taking.
Moving to our next question, we've got Joanna in Seattle joining us. Joanna, you're live with Congressman Smith. Go ahead.
Hi, Congressman Smith. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate you doing this today, and also you've helped me with some gain support for some veterans that I work with in the Renton area, so I appreciate that as well.
No problem.
So my question is about my question is about the thousands of people in King County that depend on residential treatment facilities funded by Medicare and Medicaid to care for them while receiving treatment for mental illness and substance use disorders, which actually prevent them from being homeless in our communities. What will happen if Medicare is cut, and how will these facilities be funded?
It will be devastating. The facilities are funded, as you pointed out, by Medicaid mostly. There are some people who qualify for Medicare, but Medicaid is the primary driver, and that's the big thing that Trump wants to cut. Now, look, one of the weird aspects of the Trump approach is he's very good at promising something for nothing. I mean, he promises massive tax cuts. He promises, that he's going to balance the budget. But if enough heat comes on him, he also said he wasn't going to touch Medicare or Social Security. And now they're saying they're not going to touch Medicaid. But it's a George Orwellian world here where they pass a budget that calls for $900 billion in cuts to Medicaid out of one side of their mouth, and out of the other side of their mouth, they say, of course, we're not going to touch that. Well, I think we need to hold them to that. And you cite a very good example and a good way to do that. If you have these Medicaid cuts, those residential treatment facilities that are crucial to helping us deal with the drug problem are just severely crippled in their ability to help people. And that just exacerbates the problem. I will also point out that Medicaid funds a heck of a lot of nursing homes across this country. And long-term care is a crucial challenge that we face. So show the impacts on those real lives, and it can help reverse this. But the answer to your question is, yeah, if there are cuts to Medicaid, our already inadequate residential treatment setup will get a lot worse.
And also, how will the tariffs on building materials affect the construction of new affordable housing and the developers' likeliness to build with people who are, competing for those contracts?
Yeah, no, it'd be devastating. And that was the conversation I had with the master builders a couple of days ago, where they walked through what goes into building a house, and sheetrock is a pretty big part of it. And if you put a 25% tariff on Mexico and 70% of our sheetrock comes from Mexico, it's not a particularly complicated math problem to see how that's going to drive up the prices. I forget exactly where we get our appliances from. I think some of them are from Mexico. But if you're building a house, a house has got to have an oven. It's got to have a washer and washer, dryer, refrigerator. All those things go up in price. Now, I will say that, on the Democratic side here locally, the price of housing also goes up if you have ridiculous permitting requirements. It also goes up if you pass a bunch of rules that try to make it so that no one ever has to pay rent. Landlords are not going to build and invest and buy a building if they know people don't have to actually pay rent. So a lot of the restrictions on that have made it more difficult as well. So there are certain things we can do locally, I think, to cost, but the tariff, it's funny. I was talking with Jake Goss, very smart member from up in Massachusetts, about how to deal with the great economic divide. And I think this is the central issue we face. And I've said it many times, the concentration of wealth. You got a small percentage of people that have made an unbelievable amount of money. And then you got 60 to 80% of the population that is struggling to pay the bills, struggling to, pay for housing, pay for healthcare, pay for education. how do we begin to sort of bring that back? And he was saying to me, it's like, well, is it more important to make sure that people make more money on their jobs, or is it more important to make sure that we get inflation down and under control? Because access to foreign markets is what helps keep costs down. I mean, Trump's tariffs that he's talking about on aluminum and steel, a lot of things are made with aluminum and steel, including cars. It's going to drive up the cost of cars significantly if we have to pay more money for that. Now, there have been a lot of bad trade agreements. I don't doubt that. But there's also been a lot of trade agreements that have reduced the cost of some of these basic supplies that we need to build housing, to build cars. So the tariffs that Trump has fallen in love with are quite likely going to contribute to the single greatest problem that led to him getting elected in the first place. Everyone was freaked out about inflation. So we voted for a guy who's going to massively increase tariffs and drive up costs of everything. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. And Trump has said that the tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and what the heck the beef we have with Canada is, I have no idea. I do understand that, a lot of drugs, a lot of human trafficking comes out of Mexico. We should work with them to deal with that. But why Canada? I do not know. But anyway, March 12th is when Trump has said, 12th or the 11th, that these 25% tariffs against everything, Canada and Mexico, is going to go in place. So those tariffs will really negatively impact our economy and certainly negatively impact the ability to build affordable housing.
Thank you, sir. Our next question comes from Frank in Renton. Hello, Frank. You're live with Congressman Smith. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you. And first of all, I want to thank Congressman Smith for his diligent service over the years, and keep up the good fight. My question is, to what extent can we utilize the fast-track jurisdiction that the Supreme Court has to hear conflicts between states and the federal government, and also officials within the government itself, so that we can get a quick answer to some of these burning issues? I realize a lot of cases have been going through the lower courts, but that takes so much time, and it's so frustrating. And Trump seems to have been masterful in delaying the outcome of these decisions to the point that that's kind of why he got elected. And related to that, what can we do about people like Thomas on the court, who seems to be, just thumbing his nose at all kinds of ethic rules, and no one seems to be moving towards trying to impeach him. What do you think?
Well, I think the first idea is really good. Now, we have to be strategic about it. The only thing that's been pulled up to the Supreme Court thus far was pulled up by Trump, and that was on USAID and foreign aid. The lower courts had ordered all of those programs to be turned back on by, I forget what day it was, but that day was coming up. So Trump took it up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court did not give us a good decision on that. They made the idiotic decision to say, well, it's impractical to turn all of these programs back on so quickly, so we're not going to require them to do it by that date. Now, if that was your concern, the far more intelligent thing to say would have been, okay, you might not be able to do it by that date, so we're going to hold off on sanctioning you, but keep going. Get them turned back on, all right? And we'll see. When we get to the date, if you're not there, then we'll reevaluate. But instead, the ruling that they gave, right after that ruling, Trump literally shut down 90% of all foreign aid programs, fired just about everybody at USAID, and collapsed the thing. So I think we need to think about what is a decision. And I think, what is one of the decisions that has been made that is most likely to be decided in our favor by the Supreme Court, and how can we get that in front of them? I think a lot of that is going to be on some of these domestic programs that have been shut down and frozen by the Trump administration. I think getting that blocked is a potential opportunity. Second, all the people who have been fired illegally. Yes, I think it would be a good idea to consolidate that, get it up to the Supreme Court, and then public pressure is going to be crucial, because the answer to your second question of what we can do about Justice Thomas and his completely unethical, corrupt behavior, the one thing we can do is we can pass mandatory binding ethics requirements for the Supreme Court, and we should do that. And we've introduced some legislation and all that. Of course, the Republicans don't want to do that, but we shouldn't walk away from that argument, because having a Supreme Court that is so clearly for sale with no accountability. I mean, it's not that people don't occasionally try to bribe members of Congress, but there are laws and rules against that. And a lot of my colleagues have gone to jail over the course of the 28 years that I've been here. No such thing for the Supreme Court. You know, if it comes out that they received gifts in violation of the law, it's like, oops, my bad. And that's it. So we should pass binding ethics requirements. I also believe that we should pass 10-year limits for the terms of all federal judges. I don't support lifetime appointment. It just gives complete impunity. You know, maybe you get 10 years and then we reevaluate whether or not you get extended. So there's a couple of things we can do, but in the short term, the most important thing, Justice Roberts likes to pretend that he believes in the sanctity of the court, that he doesn't want the court to be thought of as a partisan corrupt organization. And so, you know, he gets really angry when people accuse it of being that. Well, let's see. What decisions are they going to make on these clear violations of the law by the Trump administration? So I think keeping up the public pressure and then, yes, consolidating some of these cases, because you're absolutely right. Despite the lower court rulings, the Trump administration is slow walking their response. They're not implementing the court rulings and saying, well, we're working on it. And it's not being enforced. One good way to do that would be to get it up to the Supreme Court, get the final answer sooner rather than later.
So, Congressman, just looking up at the clock, I note that we're coming up towards the end of this event, but I want to make sure that we do give you some time to provide us with some closing thoughts, please.
Actually, I think if you could take one more question, and I'll put my closing thoughts in answer to that one question.
Yes, sir. So next up, going to Federal Way, we've got Victoria joining us. Victoria, you're live with the Congressman. Go ahead.
Hi. Hi. So I'm really just new to politics in general. I mean, I voted for Obama the first term, but I will be honest that politics has always been really kind of confusing to me, and I feel like I'm finally engaging enough to try to wrap my head around it, even though it is still very confusing. So this is somewhat of a two-part question. The first part is, I know we did our part for voting with the general election and then midterms, but I'm really lost on what do we do? I know you guys you're speaking a lot of like you guys fighting on our behalf, but what are we supposed to do? Because it just feels like we're hopeless. You know, it feels a little hopeless. It just feels like our hands are tied. Yeah. We don't know what to do.
Yeah. You said it's two-part. Is that the one?
This was the one.
Okay. Yeah. Look, and it's difficult. I can answer the question very easily. I mean, politics certainly have the elections, all right? And we're a representative democracy, not a true democracy, because a true democracy would be chaotic in a nation of 340 million people. Can't have every single person voting on every single thing. So we're a republic. We elect people to be our representatives and be our voices. And those elections come up at different times, locally, whatever. And yes, you can participate in those elections and support the candidates. But the other really important thing is even outside of the elections, you can express your opinion to your elected representatives. And we are vastly more responsive to that than most people give us credit for. My job is to represent the 750,000 people in the 9th District and a little bit more broadly the country as well. And I will listen to those opinions. So you express those opinions, it does help shape the opinions. And I mentioned some of the variety of different ways, you know, writing letters, sending emails, making phone calls, joining different organizations that agree with your political viewpoints on housing or criminal justice, whatever the issue is. There's plenty of organizations out there in the world who are advocating for those issues. I mentioned the Results organization earlier that's advocating on foreign aid. So your voice can always be heard, and it's frustrating. And I've seen a lot of people during my life, you know, get involved in politics who haven't been involved before, and then get frustrated within a month or two, because it's not like most other things you get involved in. There's not sort of an immediate satisfaction. You have to be patient and persistent, is what I always say, if you want to get your voice across and move issues in a direction you want to move them in. Because, as I mentioned, well, I represent 750,000 people. They don't all agree. You will advocate for a couple of issues. Other people will advocate for a couple of issues. And you have to sort of move through that. And like I said, be patient and persistent. So what you can do in the short term is express your opinion. Coming on this, that's helpful. Sending emails, writing letters to members of Congress, to the administration. The administration, every aspect of the executive branch has representatives here in the state of Washington for housing, for Social Security and Medicare, all those programs. Express those opinions and be patient and persistent both. So that's the best thing you can do. I'm glad you're getting involved. It's really important within a democracy for people to be involved. So I am up against the clock here, but thank you very much for that question. And please contact my office anytime if you've got an issue or something you'd like to be working on, or any advice you'd like on how you can help work on those issues. My only closing thoughts are what I opened with. This is as intense a time as I've ever seen in my career in politics. I'm going to be active, engaged, not 24/7. I do sleep. But every day of the week to try to address this and try to move this in a better direction, because I do believe that what Trump is doing is fundamentally a threat to our representative democracy. I think it is also jeopardizing our national security and jeopardizing our economy. And I want to fix that as quickly as possible and get it moving in a more positive direction. I look forward to working with all of you to continue in that effort, and I thank you for participating today, and we will keep doing these on a regular basis, but I'll always close saying the same thing. This is not your only opportunity to tell me what you think I ought to be doing. Please reach out, call, email, send letters, connect with the office, come by and say hello to us. We want to hear from you, and we want to do our best to represent your views and concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Congressman, to you and your staff for putting this on. And another thanks to everybody for joining us for this important call. If you would still like to subscribe to the Congressman's email updates at this point, please just stay on the line and you'll be able to leave us a message with your email address so we can get you subscribed. Thanks again, everyone, for sharing your time with us. We hope you stay healthy and safe and have a wonderful rest of your day.